just south of Pittsburgh. It's quite a hike on the way down here, and we're on the way down, and we're talking about a couple things, and she tells me about this meme that she had seen on whatever social media thing. I'm not a social media guy, and it's something about the ball dropping in New York on New Year's Eve, and I got it pretty quickly because the gentleman who I introduced is a diehard Yankees fan. So we're sitting there talking about things, and Bud, God's honest truth, she's the one that said this. She says, you ought to get up there and say something like, geez, I hope I don't drop the ball or forget to do something. You know, and for those of us who aren't baseball fans, I would go back to, of course, Aaron Judge dropping the fly ball and Garrett Cole not covering first base on a ground ball and such they lose. So that being said, I'd like to obviously congratulate all of today's inductees. Tremendous accomplishment. Yeah. So I've known Bud for essentially, it feels like forever. When I was a little boy, my dad played softball with him. And although he was at that particular point in time just nothing more than another person, I was aware who he was. And time goes on as it does, and next thing I know, I'm playing basketball in Pittsburgh against his teams. And again, not too terribly aware of who he was. Certainly had the impression that this guy needs to learn to calm down, or he's not going to make it very long. You know, he was pretty excitable. It might have had something to do with the fact that they didn't beat us a whole lot, but that's another story. Again, time continues, and I'm off to college, and next thing I know, I've taken my dad's spot. Now I'm playing softball with him, and now I'm actually starting to get to know the person and not just the fact that he was there. Get out of college and was hired to teach in Colbrook, where I started. I think it was 1991 where I started that. And he essentially told me that I was going to be coaching baseball. And it wasn't long after that, and I don't remember exactly how this transpired, but I know it was the next year. The next year I was actually coaching basketball with him, and as his JV coach / assistant. And, you know, having taught with him for almost a year before that started, as well as previous experiences, I thought I knew him pretty well until the first time I stepped into the gym with him. And, you know, it was, as is typical with the smaller schools, you know, the cyclical nature, the ups and downs, the undulations and such. They were in a period of time at that point where, although they had been to the finals recently, I don't remember the exact year. I know they got beaten in the finals by Epping close to that period of time. Things weren't good, but he had identified this group of eighth graders. And of course, again, being a small school, the eighth graders were allowed to be, whatever the word is, petitioned up to whatever it may have been, and they were all playing JV hoop. And he throws this document at me at some point. You know, memory is what it is. It tends to accentuate things one way or the other. But it seems to me like I remember the damn thing being like 15 pages long, and I'm like, you know, I thought this was coaching. It wasn't supposed to be work. And you know, and that was my initiation into how he coached, and I'll get into that later. But the bottom line is he had identified this group as being the next group that had the potential to actually do something special. And as such, he had spent tremendous amounts of times. I just remember the drills, and we did the drills over and over and over. And what happened, of course, in the long run was they ended up winning. That group of eighth graders ended up winning the first championship that Colbrook could ever won any sport in 1997. Unfortunately, at that time, Tam and I, we had a young family. I had to step away. It was just too much time involved in it. But my relationship with him did not end there. Obviously, I was still teaching with him. We taught together for 25 years. And I always get to brag to him that I got out first. I paid my pennant first. So, I found another job and I got out. He stayed, but I turned to refereeing. I officiated his games as well. And then of course my son ended up playing for him, for 4 years, and I'd like to think over that course of time, I got to know the man pretty well. So he started his basketball career in 1976, I believe, in Stratford. Was there for 4 or 5 years, I believe it was 4, and moved to Coburg, at which time he became, obviously he taught there. I've heard so much stuff about old school and so forth, and over the course of the last several speakers. Well, that was back in the day, and it stayed that way till the day he retired, I believe. He was coaching basketball. He was a full-time K-8 phys ed teacher. He was the athletic director. He coached basketball, as I said. He was coaching soccer. It was just one of those situations where, he was just on the go all the time. I marvel at his ability to do that. Excuse me. So he stayed in Coburg until he retired. I think he retired a bit earlier from teaching than he did from hoop, but he retired in 2022, which makes him about the only person I know. I heard somebody talking about 1890, so forth earlier, but I think that makes him about the only person that I know of that coached for 6 decades. He coached in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s, which, as Dave pointed out earlier, that just doesn't happen in today's world anymore. He was, if I were to describe his coaching style, the things that I've heard, it just said, and Dave pointed this out as well, the things that I've heard from speakers today, they just seem to, translate to each and every one of you folks, in the terms of the old style. I mean, he won a bunch of games, right? And we'll talk about that a bit as well, but it's not about the winning. It's why and how that happens, and the amount of work that is required to develop a culture and a program that, despite the small school nature, is able to continually compete year after year after year. He preached, defense was his thing. All right. He always had kids that can score. You can see the 1,000-point scorers on the wall when you go in the gym up there. He always had kids that can score, but it was always about defense. You want to win, you got to play defense. And if you want to play defense, you have to have heart. You have to be, he taught commitment. All these life lessons that are so very important, he taught not by lecturing them on such things, but he taught them by how he coached. You need to be responsible. You need to have commitment, all right? Kids didn't miss practice. Kids would go to school sick, spend the entire day in school sick, and then go to practice, not because they wanted to be in school, they didn't want to miss his practices. Unfortunately, I still coach. I mean, it just doesn't happen anymore. Kids are missing all the time. Excuse me again. He, if you go through his records and his accomplishments and awards, the list just never stops. The length of his career, the fact that, his kids, they adored him from start to finish. You go into one of his practices and he, supposed to be done at 9, you get out of there at 10, and his kids adored him. And it wasn't just the kids that played for him. It was the kids, the girls' sports. They all loved him. His students, they all loved him. And that was one of the things that I just found remarkable. How he could be, not in a mean sense, of course, but how he could be so intense and so demanding of them, and yet he had their unwavering respect. Not because he asked for it, but because he earned it. So, when you put it all together, you end up with a career that is, as I said, 6 decades long. You come up with a career with a man who won 606 games, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the most by any males coach in the state of New Hampshire. I think there are only 4 coaches that have achieved 600 wins. And to speak more about his approach, most people, well, I get 600 wins, that ball's mine. You know where that ball sits? The 600 win ball, that sits in the athletic director's in office in the school, because it belongs to the school. It belongs to the kids that played for him. Let's see, he had 3 state titles, 6 finals, 12 Final Fours. It just goes on. He's a recipient of the Jim Damaris Service Award. He's received the Walter, excuse me, the I'm trying to make sure I don't confuse names. He received the John Wooden Family Legacy Award. He's received the Tony Urban Award. Tony was an official up north, a longtime official, dedicated to sports and the youth. Coach soccer, 240 plus wins in soccer. I think I remember actually playing one game in baseball where he actually was coaching. I don't know if he ever fully coached baseball. I think he did. As you can see, he and I haven't talked about a lot about this stuff. But just a remarkable person. You can go through the awards all you want. It's all there. The duration of time that he spent there, the respect, as I said, that the kids had for him. All right, the accomplishments. He has a gym named after him. They renamed the gym up there after him as well. And all that stuff said, and this goes back to what several of you have said earlier today. He's a very if you watch him on the basketball floor, you'd think he's a very outgoing type of guy when he's coaching and such. He's actually a very quiet, private person. He doesn't like the accolades. Never coached for the accolades. Never publicized his accolades or his accomplishments. And someday maybe over a beer we'll talk about this in his cellar or something like that. But my true belief is the one award that he never received is the one that he probably appreciates the most, and that is the fact that he has so positively affected so many lives over the course of not only his teaching career but his coaching career as well. And that's a reciprocal thing, because the kids have also provided him with lots of positive feelings as well. This may or may not be the setting to discuss this as I wrap it up, but me personally, I cannot thank you enough, Bud, for everything that you did for me over the years, both through the coaching and the officiating, and the feedback, and just all the support. All right. And I did forget one thing I wanted to mention before I turn it over to him is, as a full-time athletic director over a course of, I believe, about 20 years, he supervised, for lack of a better term, or was the administrator thereof, of 12 different high school basketball championships, equally supporting each and every sport, while in fact doing his own thing with his basketball teams. So with that said, it's my honor to introduce Buddy Trask.
Thank you, Mr. Purrington, for telling all those lies about me, but I'll take them. First of all, I'd like to thank the NHBCO for the honor, and I've been looking forward to this quite some time. A couple of years ago, as Tim said, I got a John Wooden Award, and Dave introduced me in front of a bunch of coaches. And I think the words he used was that I was the pillar of the community. And I told him I've been called a lot of things in my time, but the pillar of the community has never been one of them. I brought this piece of paper up. Everybody's shocked because usually I just come up here and wing it, but I know I'm on a time limit and I wasn't going to go off course. But in listening to a couple of the previous speakers, Coach Clough coached in Coburg when I was in junior high, I think, in Stratford. So I was kind of familiar with him. And I've grown up in the community, and, I know a lot of players who played for him, and I know he probably remembers one of them. His name is Millard. I never met a shot I didn't like, Crawford, who talks about you all the time. And Woodsville, I knew Coach Magonzi later, And I went to school with, for 2 years, I lived in Fox Park with two of his players, Frank Leaf and Gary Hatch. They were my roommates. And so I'm very familiar. I would go into the locker room. I kind of played a little bit for the Woodsville Town team back in the day. Basically, I was hauling the beer in after the game for them to, when they would point to things, in the locker room, this is what happened on this day with Coach B, and this is what happened with this day. So I was very familiar with all those things. I started out, as Tim said, I graduated from Stratford. One of my coaches later on was Dan Chick. And then I went to Plymouth and graduated from there. And then I was a student teacher under Gary Janess. And people wonder why it's a miracle that I'm even up here today, because, I had to overcome a lot of things. No, but I learned an awful lot from both of them, and, I guess some other Gary stuff later. I was hired on Labor Day. We were going to go to Florida or something, and all of a sudden I got a phone call, can you come in and teach? And so I got the job in Stratford, and my first year we were 2-18. Not exactly a rip-roaring start. One of my first game in Orford, New Hampshire. And we got Orford's about 3 hours from Stratford. And it was a Friday or Saturday night. And I can't remember which night it was. But anyways, we got home around 11:30, 12 o'clock. And at the time I was living in my parents' basement. And I know the connotations of that today. But, back then in Stratford, we were making like $4,800. So we really couldn't live anywhere else. And my future wife, Mary, and Dale Ramsey and I sat downstairs at midnight, and we rehashed the game over a few beverages until 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, because I didn't know if I was ever going to win another game. But fortunately, we played Orford again, and, we won my second one. So, gradually in Stratford, we won 7 or 8 the next year. Then we went over 500 the next year, and then we actually went to the quarterfinals or something the next year. I had a good group. I had a young group coming, and they cut my job in half, but they said you can come back for $3,000 or whatever it was. And I'm there, no, I don't think I can, but I knew Colbrook was kind of after me. So fortunately, everything is always about timing. And fortunately, the job opened up, and I ended up in Colbrook. And, the first couple years there didn't go very well either. But, it's ironic. I was there. They wanted me because Colbrook is a basketball town. And I'd go 2 years of losing. We'd go 2 years of losing, win, have a good season. 2 or 3 more years of losing, have a good season. This thing, I don't think I was in any trouble, but the thing that probably saved me was that I was also the soccer coach, and I knew nothing about soccer. And second year we were winning, and we were winning all along in soccer. So, fortunately they stuck with me. And we had to go down and change some things, and then all of a sudden we turned around and won, 70% of the games in the 90s, 80% of the games in the 2000s, and, 70%. I mean, we had good programs and good kids, and things happened. I'm here. I'm happy that I got the award and stuff, but I'm here because I represent Colbrook basketball. I would always tell kids, when you win something, recognize how you won it. Recognize the people that are with you and helped you get the award. And it's no different with me, And I got 4 groups of people here that, I want to thank for letting me be me. And, without them, there wouldn't have been the success that we've had. And I'll start, usually you say the best for last, but I'll start with the first group first, which is, my family. My parents, had a couple things. Do your job, show up for work, do your job, don't make excuses. And, we had 3 or 4 major rules during the time we were there, and one of them, the bottom line all the time was, do not make excuses. And if you're not playing, get better. If you didn't win, get better. That's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple concept. But we, that was always the big thing. The first person, obviously, is my wife. Tim went through the things. We were both full-time teachers. He went through mine, but she was the same way. We were both full-time teachers. We were both coaching soccer in the fall. She had the girls, I had the boys. We were both coaching during the winter. She was the assistant varsity coach, and I was the varsity coach. Spring and the early times were kind of good, But during the period from when Kevin was born, about a 20-year span from when Kevin was born to when Corey graduated, that was our life. And 80, no game managers at that time. You had to be at all the home games, and I was AD for elementary, junior high, JV, varsity. I used to love those Saturday morning, 9 o'clock elementary games. They were right up there on my list. Used to love those. And then during the summers, as I explained the money situation, I would work at the Cog Railway 3 or 4 days a week. And, later on, as Tim was there, we were playing softball all the time. But then all through all that, Mary was home. And, she would take care of the kids. And, somehow we made it through. But, she was the major person behind the scenes there as far as getting that right. So, I want to thank her for allowing me to be me. Sometimes she didn't like it. There were some times, when I would be out scouting or we'd be on a 80 trip or something, and Mr. Janess would take a wrong turn on the way home. We didn't get to where we needed to be on time. But, throughout it all, she put up with it. Not very well at times, but she put up with it. And, we ended up raising 2 great kids, coaches' kids. Sometimes coaches' kids, they all go through the good things, about, you get to go on the bus, this, that, and whatever, but they spent a lot of time in their early years on the fields, in the gym. I'm sure they didn't want to be there. We kind of worried about, geez, they're down there all the time, they might not want to play. But fortunately, they did. They didn't have to worry about the main thing about being a coach's kid. You're only playing because your mom or dad is coaching, because they were both very good. And they went on to become very successful. They have blessed us with 4 grandchildren, Corey and Alan, and the 2 redheaded lobsters up in the back there, Brielle and Brittany. And then Kevin and Danielle, and Skylar, and the first 3 grandchildren were all girls, and it's not that if the 4th one was a girl, I was going to commit suicide or anything, but it was nice to get the boy, and Kellen is all boy, even at 1 year old. I don't want to get into a Donald Trump, Arnold Palmer deal here, but he looks like a miniature man right now, so we'll see. But without them and their support, we wouldn't have been able to do the things that we needed to do. The second group is all the administrators that I had, NHI people. I was involved with the NHI for a long time. Superintendents, principals. I was very lucky to have great principals that understood my job and carved out time for me, or let me have all my days off when I was in Concord and doing all that stuff. Friends, parents, yes, parents, we were lucky for the most part to have a good group of parents. The thing is, we're being way up north. It takes about 10 years for things to gradually flow up there. You know, so that when there are all kinds of parent issues down in this part of the country, there really wasn't any up there until later. You know, so we were kind of lucky in that respect. Newspaper people, you know, and, you know, his friends. And when you meet a lot of people and do a lot of things, you know, we had a table in the back of Growthton people, you know, and it's amazing because, you know, in the late 90s and 2000s, the Growthton-Colebrook rivalry was as good as, if not better than, any rivalry in the state. You had to be there to see it. You know, you had to be there to see the intensity. You know, Gary and I would take a lot of trips together, and we decided to, okay, we're going to have each other's homecomings in the fall. We put them a week apart, you know, homecoming, week off, another homecoming. And then during the winter for the basketball, we decided we would put one of the games on Friday, and then we would put the other game on Saturday afternoon. And despite Mark not liking the Saturday afternoon games a whole lot as far as the game goes, he liked it after. But during the game, you know, it was such a showcase for our kids, because that was one of the showcase games in our division each year. And the gyms were full, and you saw all kinds of players and coaches from the other teams in our divisions there, and it exposed our kids to a big-time playoff atmosphere. All those Colbert Growthton games during that time were and it helped our kids tremendously. And, you know, then after the games, you get all that vitriol during the games, but then after the games, we would go out. And, you know, Mark and I, there were some times, you know, if one of us beat the other one by 30 points, it wasn't a big deal. You know, but if it was a close game, which what most of them were when we would go out, you know, we'd, the first hour and a half, we'd kind of just stay away from each other a little bit because the other one needed to come down. But gradually over the course of the night, we'd get back and get together. And that, you know, despite all that, our families were very close growing up. We raised our kids together. And, you know, all of that stuff that went on, it never really interfered with what we had as friends. And all these Growthton guys, I mean, they've been to all three of my things, and they just like to go somewhere and party. But, you know, but I appreciate that because you usually don't see that. You know, you usually don't see that at all. But it happens up there. The third group is my players. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have real good players. You know, we have a wall up there with all kinds of people that made all-state teams, 1,000-point scorers. I think in a 15-year span, we had 4 kids that were named Player of the Year, which means they got to play in the, you know, New Hampshire-Vermont game. As, you know, and on those New Hampshire-Vermont teams, you had Division IV had 1 player. You know, and that was it. And we had 4 during that time. So we coached a lot of good players. But I liked the role players. You know, I liked the blue-collar workers, the kids who, yep, you got your stars, but the kids who really were the guts of your team. And, you know, we went through times where there'd be 5, 6, 7 years where we wouldn't have to say anything to our kids. You know, our kids handled the situations. So they had bought into everything totally. And as coaches, you know, if you got times where, you know, you got kids and you never have to say anything to them about all the outside noises going on, everything is always handled, you know, within the stuff, now you know you got something. And that was passed on from group to group to group to group, you know, and I'm not saying they were all angels, because they weren't. But, most of that stuff, the coaches didn't really have to be the bad guys. They controlled and did everything that they needed to do. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the kids that I had in Stratford. And, I graduated from high school when I was 17 years old, so I was coaching at 21, barely 2 or 3 years older than most of the kids that I had. It was the mid-'70s or late '70s, early '80s. Of course, the big coach at the time was Bobby Knight. And I guess I thought I was him, according to a lot of people. But those poor kids, I didn't know anything, really. And they went through some stuff. And didn't faze them. Kept coming back. My thing was, don't let me beat you. If you let me beat you, then when you're playing before 2,000 people at Plymouth, it's not going to happen for you. And they didn't. And they are part of, it's not all just Colbert. They are part of what made me a better coach over the course of time. And, I appreciated it, and I appreciated my time there. Last group is, the coaches that I had in the program, the elementary coaches, the, junior high coaches. Over the course of time, we got the people in there that we wanted to get in, and they did the thing. Sometimes they didn't want to. Tim was talking about, man to man. We were strictly a zone team all the way through, zone traps, zone presses, full court, all this stuff. And then, my thought was, we're going to Plymouth. We're not always going to be ahead. Sometimes we're going to be behind. We're going to have to play man. So we changed, and I bought this book, Bill Harbert's Man-to-Man Defense or something like that. And I did. I went and highlighted a bunch of stuff, took it out, put on the top, Mohawk Man-to-Man Defense, passed it out to the kids and passed it out to Tim. And the one thing about Tim is he's very meticulous. And, that's one of the reasons why I chose him. And he was the main one. When those kids got to me, they already knew all the stuff on the sheets. We could expand off that into doubles and doing all that stuff. But, he was right. I went up to his room one day and basically said, "Well, good job you've done. You're now the boys' baseball coach. Congratulations. I'll see you in a couple of weeks." And he never come back and said anything, so it worked. And then, I did the same thing with basketball because I knew I needed them. And we did have this group. And they had 2 or 3 guys in front of them that were going to be leaders. They were never going to be around for the championship, but they were going to be good leaders. And they had 2 or 3 kids behind them that would blend in with that group. So I knew if Colbert was ever going to win one, this was going to be the group. And they were. And they laid the groundwork for everything else coming along. And so Tim was one of the assistant coaches. I had a real bunch of assistant coaches, and I don't want to name them all, but there were 2 that I wanted to name, and Tim is one of them. And the other one here today was the other one that I was going to name, and that is Dwayne Call. And Dwayne is just I don't know how he does it, but he, for years, first he was, he had his kid who took my place, who's also here today, Ryan Call. Ryan, when I retired, took all my mowing jobs, took my teaching job, took my AD job, and, so that's that there. But, Dwayne came up. He was in a group that was the last championship of boys, and Dwayne had them in the elementary school when they started, so he coached them in soccer, he coached them in basketball, he coached them in baseball, all the way up through, junior high, and then there was an opening and he came with me. So the one thing you knew right off is those kids knew how to act, they were smart about the game, they knew how to play, and they were going to be dedicated. So once again, that made my life a whole lot easier. you know. And then when he got to me, you know, this is kind of, he was an assistant coach on the girls, he was an assistant coach on the boys, so he went to both practices every single night. You know, I mean, you know, you don't see that anywhere anymore. You know, sometimes I question his sanity a little bit about why he was doing that. You know, but when I first got to him, it's like, well, we're going to meet and we're going to go over some stuff, right? And I said, yeah, okay, we can do that. You know, and so we met for a couple hours, and then, you know, it's like, well, when are we meeting again? And I kind of thought that was going to be it. But I said, okay, well, we'll meet tomorrow. And then after that is, so when are we going to meet again? We got some more stuff we need to go over and do. He was a very thorough person. You know, but at the time when he came along, I was starting to get, you know, after 30-something years, I was starting to get a little stale in what I was doing, and I was starting to get a little worn down. And he came along and threw out all kinds of ideas, all kinds of makeshift drills that he would make up and do, and they were really good, you know. And over the course of time, you know, he bought into the program, and he turned out, in the long run, believe it or not, you know, we had, you know, you get the coaches, and somebody's good and somebody's bad. I was always the bad guy. You know, he ended up being a bad guy, and I ended up being a good guy. And I kind of like having that for a change for a little bit. You know, I'd go somewhere for the day, and the kids would say, "You'll be back for practice tonight, right?" And I'm there, yeah, maybe. You know, I might not be, because the practices were actually harder when he was there than was when we were there. But, you know, I appreciated all that coming in, and, you know, those two guys especially helped me continue along and get there and until I retired. You know, and that brings me, you know, as I said to the last point, I'm very proud to be here tonight, but I'm here as a representative of the boys Colbert basketball team. You know, I'm just a name that's up here. But all of these people that I just mentioned and have just as much to do with what went on as me. So thank you for listening, and I'm done.